Well, John Keogh in the Fin Review writes that actually the private sector is teetering on recession. So can you explain to us how tough it is at the moment for the private sector?
Yeah, well, what we're seeing is obviously very soft consumer spending, and that's been the real driver of this slowdown in the economy. And that is all because of inflation, a higher tax burden because of bracket creep and rising real income tax rates, and of course, higher interest rates. That's squeezed household incomes. Consumer spending has slowed. It remains soft in the quarter despite a pickup in income because of tax cuts. And then the business side is seeing very flat activity around construction, and business investment has slowed down. But to this point that it's in recession, that's what the figures show us. But the question is, if it wasn't for the government out there hiring people at the expense of the private sector, taking up all the trades to build infrastructure and other things, what would the private sector be doing? And I think the private sector would be actually growing. So I don't think it's the right way to characterise it. But of course, what it feels like to most Australians is the reality of a fall in our standard of living, which has been going on now every quarter for the last 7 quarters. And this is a long, drawn-out process.
Yeah, and of course that's, GDP per capita. So while GDP is still growing, 0.8%, as you said, much lower than the 3.3% we still usually see. It was even smaller in the September quarter, just 0.3%, our national GDP. But as you say, GDP per capita now going backwards for 7 consecutive quarters. What does this mean for the average family? How are they feeling this pinch?
Well, I mean, Australia's had a great economy for 30 years. All the reforms we did, opening up to the world, a great world economy that we could trade with. And what we saw there was our standard of living going up gradually, 1% a year. Maybe we'd have a good year of 2%. And this sort of saw us get to the point where not 5 or 6 years ago, we were one of the richest countries in the world. But what we have seen is a sudden and sharp step backwards in our real incomes, household real incomes of an order of magnitude of around 8 to 10%. This is much worse than any other developed economy, and it's all because of inflation. And it's because we have failed to deal with inflation in a timely manner. And this is a deliberate strategy. The government's desire to avoid a recession at all costs has allowed the RBA to go on this narrow path, not raise rates as much as other countries. And of course, they're in there spending money to try and prop the thing up when indeed it doesn't need propping up. So we haven't taken our medicine, we haven't dealt with inflation, and that's what's driving living standards backwards, people's purchasing power.
Just very quickly, Warren, before you go, we are starting to see speculation from some economists now that our weak economy might prompt the RBA to cut rates earlier than it would have done. What's your position on this?
Well, I don't think that's the right way to look at these numbers. And the governor only a week ago reiterated this exact story, that the economy is constrained, that the demand from the government and broader is pushing still inflation above target, and they don't really have any scope to cut right now. So I don't see a rate cut anytime soon. And if they did, I think it would be a very dangerous strategy, because the reason we're in this mess is because they haven't probably raised rates enough initially.
Well, look, we'll hear from Michelle Bullock next week, but up until this point, she's given no indication that there's any rate cuts on the horizon at any point in the near future. All right, Warren Hogan, appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.